Millions of people watched that kiss. Almost nobody understood what it was hiding. On August 17, 2000, Al Gore grabbed his wife on a convention stage and kissed her for 6 full seconds in front of 70 million people. The crowd screamed. Reporters called it shocking. One writer even called it X-rated. But here's the strange part. 10 years later, this couple, married for 4 decades, 4 kids, a Nobel Prize, a presidential race decided by a few hundred votes, quietly ended it all. No affair. No scandal. Just a short letter to friends. So what really happened behind that marriage? And what was that kiss actually covering up? Let's go back to the beginning because the answer isn't simple at all. Mary Elizabeth Herson was born in Washington, D.C. in 1948. Her father owned a plumbing supply business. Her parents divorced when she was very young. Some records say she was 14 months old. Others say 4 years old. Even her own biography can't agree on the basic facts. That tells you something already. Her story has always been carefully managed, polished, and controlled long before the world ever knew her name. She grew up with her mother and grandmother in Arlington, Virginia. Her nickname, Tipper, came from a nursery rhyme her mother used to sing to her as a baby. She was a tomboy. She played basketball, softball, and field hockey. And she was the drummer in an all-girl rock band called the Wildcats. Remember that detail. Matters a lot later. She once told a magazine that growing up around divorce gave her deep empathy for people going through hard times. Growing up with divorce is not easy, she said, but it gave her plenty of empathy for people living less than perfect lives. That empathy would define her entire life and her entire career of public advocacy. But there's something else that empathy like that often creates. A tendency to put yourself last. A tendency to absorb other people's pain as a form of connection instead of building your own path first. And her marriage would test that tendency in ways she never expected when she was just a teenager falling in love for the first time. She met Al Gore at his senior prom in 1965. She actually came to that dance with someone else that night. He noticed her anyway. She later described the moment as absolutely pure animal magnetism. He invited her to visit his family's farm in Tennessee. When he went north to Harvard, she followed too, enrolling at a small college in Massachusetts before transferring to Boston University, where she studied psychology. One evening, walking along the Charles River near the end of her junior year, he proposed with a ring and a view of the water. She said yes without hesitation. They married on May 19, 1970, at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. The very same week, she graduated from Boston University with her psychology degree. She was 21 years old. At that exact moment, she had everything most people dream of. Love, education, ambition, and a future that felt wide open in every direction. But things were about to change. Al Gore didn't come from an ordinary family. His father, Senator Albert Gore Sr., was a towering figure in Tennessee politics who helped shape national highway laws and took bold, unpopular stands on civil rights in the Vietnam War. That same father lost his Senate seat in 1970 after opposing the war, paying a heavy price for doing what he believed was right. And he passed something on to his son that went far beyond politics. He passed down a sense that his entire life had already been planned out for him before he even had a say in it. Al Jr. absorbed that pressure completely, without complaint, almost without question. He went to Harvard. He went to Vietnam instead of using the deferments his family's connections could have easily arranged, partly to protect his father's political image from attack. He came home, briefly attended divinity school, worked as a newspaper reporter, and then did exactly what had always been expected of him. He ran for Congress in 1976 at the age of 28. He won. The plan that had been built for him since childhood was moving forward exactly on schedule. And Tipper was part of that plan. But here's what almost nobody talks about. She had her own plan too, and it was just as real. By the time Al entered Congress, Tipper wasn't simply a supportive wife waiting quietly on the sidelines for instructions. She had a master's degree in psychology from Vanderbilt, completed in 1975. She was working as a freelance photographer with genuine professional assignments. She had talent, vision, and serious artistic ambition. Her photography wasn't some casual hobby to pass the time. It was something she pursued with real seriousness, documenting homeless families, children living in poverty, and patients inside psychiatric facilities. These weren't snapshots. They were the work of someone with a trained eye and a genuine social conscience, someone who saw photography as both art and argument at the same time. Over the following decades, she would publish photography books, hold gallery shows, and donate the proceeds from her art auctions to organizations helping people living with HIV and AIDS. This entire body of serious professional work remains almost invisible in most retellings of her story, simply because those retellings are always about him. But when Al won his congressional seat, she stayed behind in Tennessee to raise their growing family. 4 children arrived within 9 years: Karenna in 1973, Kristen in 1977, Sarah in 1979, and Albert III in 1982. By the time their youngest was born, Tipper was 34 years old. And the career she had been quietly building, the master's degree, the photography assignments, the real artistic momentum, had been almost completely swallowed by school runs, diapers, and a husband who commuted constantly between 2 cities. Do you think you'd have made the same choice in her position? Let us know in the comments, because what she does next says a lot about who she really was underneath all of it. She didn't disappear into the background completely, though. In 1978, she founded the Congressional Wives Task Force, focused on child nutrition and the effects of media violence on children. Sounds noble, and honestly it did produce real good in the world. But look closely at the name for a second. Congressional Wives Task Force. It's an organization defined entirely by its members' relationship to somebody else's career. That was the world Tipper was living in during those years. Whatever she built for herself still existed inside the shadow of somebody else's title, somebody else's job, somebody else's schedule. Then, in 1985, something happened that would follow her for the rest of her life, and follow her husband's political career right along with it. She bought her 11-year-old daughter Karenna a Prince album called Purple Rain. Had won Grammy Awards. Critics everywhere praised it. She sat down to listen to it together with her daughter and heard a song called Darling Nikki, which described an explicit sexual encounter in shockingly direct language. There was no warning label anywhere on the packaging. Nothing to tell a parent what was actually inside before they handed it to their child. She wasn't trying to ban Prince or censor music entirely. She wanted warning labels, nothing more than that at first. So she called Susan Baker, wife of Treasury Secretary James Baker, along with 2 other politically connected Washington wives, and together the 4 of them formed the Parents Music Resource Center that same spring. It became one of the most controversial campaigns in American music history. The PMRC had no general membership, no legislative authority, and no elected mandate whatsoever. What it had was access, real direct access, because these were the wives of some of the most powerful men in Washington. And that access got them straight into a Senate Commerce Committee hearing room on September 19, 1985. Musicians showed up that day to fight back hard. Frank Zappa compared the PMRC's proposal to treating dandruff by decapitation. Dee Snider from Twisted Sister walked in wearing his full stage gear, ripped denim and leather, and calmly dismantled their entire argument point by point, leaving the senators visibly stunned by how composed he was. John Denver, of all people, the man everyone expected to support the PMRC completely, instead compared music censorship to Nazi book burning. Zappa said something in that hearing that cuts far deeper than anyone realized at the time. If it looks like censorship and it smells like censorship, he said, it is censorship no matter whose wife happens to be talking about it. That line mattered more than people understood in the moment. Because Tipper wasn't sitting at that table as an independent voice with her own institutional power. She was there specifically because she was a senator's wife. That was the entire source of her leverage. And it came at a cost that her husband would end up paying for years afterward. Al Gore, already a senator himself by then, sat quietly beside another lawmaker during that hearing. He supported his wife publicly with his presence, but he carefully avoided endorsing the specific legislation she was pushing for. He was trying to protect two very different things at the exact same time: his marriage and his political future. And those two things were suddenly pulling hard in opposite directions. But there was a hidden cost to all of this that would haunt Al Gore's career for decades to come. The recording industry eventually agreed to a voluntary warning sticker instead of facing actual legislation. That familiar black and white label appeared on albums starting that same year, and it's still stamped onto explicit music today. But here's the twist nobody at the PMRC saw coming. Later industry studies showed the sticker didn't consistently hurt album sales at all. In several cases, it actually boosted them significantly. Teenagers saw the warning label and wanted the album even more because of it. And Darling Nikki, the very song that had started this entire crusade, eventually became regarded as one of Prince's most important and celebrated recordings. The music industry survived the PMRC completely intact. Tipper's reputation did not survive nearly as easily. Frank Zappa publicly called her a cultural terrorist and spent years afterward campaigning against anything resembling censorship. Dee Snider named an entire tour Twisted Censorship in direct response. Eminem mentioned her by name in a lyric years later on one of his most famous albums. A metal band called Anthrax wrote and released an entire song aimed directly at her. For the next 2 decades and beyond, her name became cultural shorthand, fair or not, for political interference in art and music. And that reputation stuck to Al everywhere his career went next, quietly following him into every future campaign like a shadow he couldn't fully shake off. Then, in April 1989, something happened that had absolutely nothing to do with politics or music, and it changed the entire trajectory of the family forever. Al Gore III, their 6-year-old son, was hit by a car outside a baseball stadium in Baltimore after a game. He was thrown nearly 40 feet through the air on impact. His father picked up his own son, covered head to toe in blood, and held him tightly until the ambulance finally arrived. The boy had a fractured skull and serious internal injuries. He spent an entire month in intensive care. His full recovery took a complete year. Al later wrote that this single terrifying moment cracked open something deep inside him, something that made his environmental work suddenly feel personal and urgent instead of distant and abstract the way it always had before. But what about Tipper? Her story from that exact same accident is much harder to find anywhere in the public record, because she never told it publicly the same way he did. Some months after her son's accident, she found herself sitting quietly in a mental health professional's office and said words she wouldn't repeat publicly for another entire decade. "I'm not here as a friend this time," she said. "I'm not here as a volunteer for the cause. I'm here because I need some help." She was diagnosed with clinical depression. Before we get to what happened next, subscribe now, because what she did with that diagnosis, and exactly how long she kept it hidden from the entire world, reveals something most people never expected from a political marriage that looks so effortlessly perfect from the outside. She received medication. She received therapy. She recovered fully. And then she kept the entire thing completely secret for 10 full years. During those exact 10 years, Al ran for president and lost the Democratic primary in 1988. He ran for vice president in 1992 and won alongside Bill Clinton. Tipper became Second Lady of the United States. She served 2 complete terms, smiling through state dinners, appearing at countless campaign stops, raising teenagers, and eventually serving as a mental health policy advisor to the Clinton administration itself. And through every single moment of it, every photograph, every public appearance, every smiling wave from a stage, she was quietly managing a diagnosed mental illness that almost nobody outside her closest inner circle knew existed. Think carefully about the political climate of that era. Years earlier, a vice presidential candidate named Tom Eagleton had been forced completely off an entire national ticket in just days after his own history of depression treatment became public knowledge. That memory hadn't faded from Washington's collective memory at all. So Tipper's silence wasn't just personal caution. It was political survival in the truest sense. When she finally revealed her diagnosis publicly in 1999, at her own White House conference on mental health that she had personally organized, it took genuine courage to stand up and say those words out loud. But it was also, in a strange and complicated way, perfectly timed for the political moment ahead. Her husband was preparing to run for president again. Her deeply personal story had suddenly become politically useful at exactly the right moment in history. That doesn't make it fake. Her pain was completely real. But the timing wasn't accidental either. Both of those things were true at the exact same time. And honestly, that contradiction had basically become the defining pattern of her entire adult life inside this marriage. Most of us will never stand on a stage in front of millions of strangers. But many of us know exactly what it feels like to carry something painful in complete silence because the timing never quite feels safe enough to share it. That part of her story isn't really about politics at all. It's just deeply, painfully human. Which brings us right back to that famous kiss in 2000. Al Gore had a serious image problem throughout his entire political career. People consistently saw him as stiff, robotic, and emotionally distant. His own campaign team knew exactly what the solution to that problem was. Pipper. She had the natural warmth, the easy charm with total strangers, the spontaneous laughter that he simply couldn't manufacture on command no matter how hard he tried. That kiss on the convention stage was absolutely real, genuine affection between two people who had shared 30 years of marriage together. It was also, at the exact same time, a carefully calculated piece of political theater designed specifically to humanize a candidate who badly needed humanizing in the public eye. Both things were true simultaneously, and by that point in their marriage, even they themselves probably couldn't have told you exactly where the real feeling stopped and the strategy quietly took over. He lost that election by the narrowest margin in modern American history, 537 votes in the state of Florida, ultimately decided by a divided Supreme Court. He had actually won more total votes across the entire country than his opponent. He still lost the presidency itself. Tipper stood beside him through the concession speech, composed and dignified as always, the same way she had been for 30 years. And then they went home to Tennessee together, and for the first time in decades, there was no campaign schedule left standing to organize their entire lives around anymore. That's exactly when the real shift quietly began, so slowly that nobody around them could pinpoint the exact moment it had started. Al Gore found a stunning second act almost immediately. He turned his old climate change lecture, the one he'd been giving in various forms since the early 90s, into a full documentary with filmmaker Davis Guggenheim called An Inconvenient Truth, released in 2006. It became a massive critical and commercial success that nobody in his position could have reasonably predicted. It won 2 Academy Awards outright. He shared the Nobel Peace Prize the very next year with the United Nations Climate Panel. Without holding a single elected office, he had somehow become one of the most globally recognized and morally respected public figures anywhere on the planet. He was invited to speak everywhere imaginable, and he was constantly traveling to make that message heard. His former campaign manager, Tony Qualo, later told reporters something incredibly telling after the separation was announced. He said Al was on the road with such frequency that Tipper's life simply wasn't involved in any of it anymore. The climate work had become his mission entirely. His audience, his brand new purpose in life. She wasn't part of it in any practical sense whatsoever. But here's what's genuinely fascinating about this whole chapter. While Al was chasing his enormous new global mission, Tipper wasn't sitting quietly at home waiting for him to return. She was finally doing things that had absolutely nothing to do with his career at all, for the first time in decades. She published photography books and held gallery shows across the country. She played drums alongside surviving members of the Grateful Dead during a tour in 2009, sitting in on a performance in Nashville. She played with Willie Nelson at Farm Aid. She even performed with the legendary jazz pianist Herbie Hancock at an international jazz competition years later. Remember that girl who played drums in a band called the Wildcats at just 15 years old? She was finally, quietly, coming all the way back after 40 years away. For nearly the entire marriage, everything she had ever built publicly existed only because of Al's position and title. The Congressional Wives Group existed because he sat in Congress. The PMRC had genuine leverage because he was a sitting senator. Her mental health advocacy had a national platform because he was Vice President of the United States. Every single piece of her public identity had been borrowed, directly or indirectly, from his career. For the very first time in 40 years of marriage, she was building something that was entirely, completely, unmistakably her own. And that changed absolutely everything between